Maya Khan was the kind of woman people often passed without a second glance. Her beauty was understated, her presence subtle, and her demeanor humble. In a world obsessed with glamour, her simplicity was nearly invisible. She wore a modest beige dress that hung loosely over her slender frame, paired with worn leather sandals and a small brown handbag that had clearly seen better days. Her long dark hair was neatly tied back in a braid, and she wore no makeup aside from a little lip balm. There was no hint of wealth or prestige about her, nothing flashy, nothing branded, just a quiet grace that didn't shout to be noticed. That morning, the sun was high and golden over London International Airport. The hustle and bustle of international travelers filled the air, suitcases rolled across polished floors, announcements echoed from overhead speakers, and luxury cars pulled up to the VIP terminal where high-profile guests were ushered in discreetly. Among them walked Maya, alone but confident, carrying only a small handbag and a single boarding pass tucked inside her passport. Her steps were neither rushed nor hesitant. She had done this before. Yet something about this day felt different. As Maya approached the VIP gate, the glances started. The security staff near the entrance, tall men in tailored uniforms and stern expressions, looked up. One of them, a fair-haired man with a square jaw and mirrored sunglasses, stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, this area is for VIP passengers only," he said sharply, as though she had wandered into a place she didn't belong. Maya stopped, her expression calm but expectant. "My name should be on the list," she said politely, offering her passport. The officer didn't take it. His gaze lingered on her plain dress, her scuffed shoes, and the absence of anything that might hint at importance. No assistant followed behind her, no luggage cart, no entourage. She looked like someone lost. Someone out of place. "I'm going to have to ask you to use the regular terminal," he said, waving her off with a dismissive hand. Maya didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or plead her case. Instead, she simply stood there, her grip tightening slightly on the strap of her handbag. There was a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes, but it quickly faded behind a quiet strength. She had been here before, in many places where assumptions were made based on appearances. This wasn't new to her. She didn't explain who she was or who she was meeting. Instead, she looked up at the sky beyond the glass walls of the terminal, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Around her, the stares continued. A couple in designer clothes glanced in her direction and chuckled quietly. A flight attendant looked over and raised an eyebrow. Even a group of young influencers nearby whispered while pretending to snap selfies. No one offered help. No one questioned the officer's decision. After all, how could a woman dressed so plainly be anything more than a lost traveler? What they didn't know was that Maya Khan had flown on private jets more times than most of them had flown economy. She had dined with royalty, sat across from presidents, and traveled to 5 continents without ever making a scene. But unlike the women people expected to see in these spaces, dripping in diamonds, flaunting couture brands, and flaunting followers, Maya had no interest in being noticed. She came from a different world, one where grace spoke louder than fashion and silence often had more power than shouting. She took a deep breath and turned to sit on the nearby bench, her eyes never leaving the sky. Time passed. 10 minutes. 15. The officer looked over occasionally, confused now. Why hadn't she left? Why wasn't she causing a scene like others might? That unease grew stronger when he noticed a shift in the atmosphere. A low rumble echoed in the distance. At first, it was easy to mistake for any other jet engine. But then came the whispers. Inside the terminal, passengers turned toward the large panoramic windows facing the runway. Staff members began pulling out their phones. The unmistakable sound of a powerful aircraft approaching filled the terminal with a quiet thrill. A sleek, massive private jet appeared from the clouds, snow-white with gold and crimson accents, shining like a jewel against the sky. The aircraft, unlike any commercial model, began to descend toward the private landing strip adjacent to the VIP terminal. Its engines hummed with a deep, commanding roar, the kind that announced not just the arrival of wealth, but of legacy, power, and exclusivity. The whispers turned to gasps. Someone muttered, "Is that the AR-1 Falcon? That's Arman Rahim's jet." Eyes widened. Phones were lifted. Even the officer who had stopped Maya stood straighter, adjusting his collar as if preparing for a royal visit. Maya remained seated, calm and still, watching the jet land with quiet recognition. As the aircraft taxied to a halt, the terminal's black-tinted exit doors opened. A luxury SUV pulled onto the tarmac, black as night with a chrome finish that gleamed under the morning sun. Out stepped Armin Rahim himself, tech billionaire, philanthropist, and one of the most powerful men in the world. Clad in a simple navy shirt and slacks, he walked with quiet confidence, ignoring the cluster of staff awaiting him. His eyes scanned the terminal until they landed on her. Maya. He walked directly toward the glass, bypassing protocol and cutting through the stunned silence of the room. The doors opened, and as he reached her, he smiled. "Sorry I'm late, Jan," he said softly. Maya stood and returned his smile. Behind them, the room stood frozen. The same officer who had dismissed her now looked as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. Travelers who had mocked her whispered in disbelief. The influencers stopped filming. The quiet woman they had all ignored was not only welcomed by Armin Rahim, she was clearly his equal. His partner. His wife. And with that, the world around her changed. Not because she had shouted, not because she had argued, but because she had waited, with patience and dignity, for the truth to land right in front of them. The atmosphere at the VIP terminal shifted in a matter of seconds. One moment, Maya was just another unassuming woman standing awkwardly at a gate she wasn't supposed to access. The next, her quiet presence was eclipsed by the thunderous arrival of a billionaire's aircraft. As the massive jet came to a halt on the tarmac, its gleaming body catching the morning light like a polished diamond, all eyes turned toward the runway. No one had expected such a spectacle that day, least of all the staff, who suddenly seemed nervous and unsure of themselves. The AR-1 Falcon wasn't just any private jet, it was a symbol of immense wealth, rarely seen and barely spoken of outside business magazines and elite circles. It had the kind of aura that made even the most self-important passengers feel small. Inside the terminal, whispers began to ripple across the room like a spreading fire. "That's Armin Rahim's plane. The billionaire from Dubai, right? Why would he be here?" But amid the murmurs and awe, something far more surprising was unfolding. Armin Rahim, often a ghost in public spaces, had exited the jet and was walking directly toward the terminal. Not to meet with an ambassador. Not to address the press. But for her, Maya Khan. The woman in the plain beige dress, who had until minutes ago been dismissed as someone who didn't belong. The security officer, who had brushed her off without a glance, now stood frozen, his professionalism crumbling under the weight of his mistake. Staff members straightened their uniforms in a rush, unsure whether to run forward to greet the billionaire or stay back and avoid further embarrassment. Maya didn't move. She stood quietly as Armin approached, her calm presence in sharp contrast to the chaos building around her. His face, usually stoic in business interviews, lit up as he saw her. Without hesitation, he reached for her hand, pulled her gently toward him, and said in a voice loud enough for those around to hear, "I'm sorry I kept you waiting." Gasps echoed from every corner of the terminal. Now the story was clear, this wasn't a chance meeting, and Maya wasn't lost. She wasn't someone trying to sneak into a restricted area. She was the reason the most expensive private aircraft in the region had landed that morning. She was Armin Rahim's wife. The silence that followed was thunderous. The officer who had stopped her earlier tried to stammer out an apology, but Armin's sharp glance was enough to silence him. "Next time," he said coldly, "check the list before you judge the face." Without waiting for a response, he took Maya's hand, and together they walked down the private pathway toward the waiting SUV. People stared, some in awe, others in shame. No one dared speak again. Maya, still dressed simply, had turned the entire terminal upside down, not with anger or arrogance but with patience and quiet dignity. And the world had finally started to notice. Chapter 1. The Rift. Junaid Malik, the ambitious CEO of Skyline Constructions, prided himself on efficiency and results. Under his leadership, the company had grown rapidly, winning high-profile contracts that promised to transform the city skyline. Yet the biggest project of all, a sprawling commercial complex in the heart of the city, was on the brink of collapse, not because of financial woes or technical failures, but due to a brewing conflict between him and his site manager, Riaz Khan. Riaz was everything Junaid was not: meticulous, cautious, and an old-school craftsman who had risen through the ranks. To Junaid, Riaz's slow, measured approach seemed like unnecessary delay, an obstacle in the fast lane to completion. But Riaz saw danger in the rushed plans that Junaid pushed, warning of compromised safety and unstable foundations. Their disagreements, initially professional, soon turned personal, erupting into heated arguments witnessed by the staff and threatening the morale of the entire crew. The final straw came when Junaid publicly reprimanded Riaz during a site inspection, accusing him of laziness and incompetence. Riaz fired back, calling Junaid reckless and disconnected from the realities on the ground. The fight was caught on video and spread quickly within the company and beyond, becoming a media spectacle. The City Development Authority, worried about safety and project delays, stepped in with an official warning. Unless the two reconciled and found common ground, the project would be halted indefinitely. Facing immense pressure from the board and government regulators, Junaid reluctantly agreed to a mediation session. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unresolved anger and resentment. Both men sat across from each other, forced to listen, to speak, and, most difficult of all, to understand. The mediator guided the conversation toward the core issues: safety, deadlines, leadership, and respect. Slowly, grudgingly, the walls between them began to crack. In an effort to rebuild trust and see things from a different perspective, Junaid was compelled to spend a full day on site, not as the CEO issuing commands from the comfort of his office, but as an observer embedded in the daily realities of the workers. From dawn, he shadowed the crew, noting their rhythms, their concerns, their skillful labor. Riaz was no lazy manager. He was a guardian of the team's safety and well-being, a leader who earned his crew's respect by sharing their burdens and demanding excellence. As the sun set, Junaid's eyes fell on a welder, a middle-aged man, weathered but focused, who paused in the stifling heat to wipe sweat from his brow and then carefully rechecked the alignment of a steel beam before letting the torch flame meet it. That moment crystallized something deep inside Junaid. The man's diligence, the collective effort, the risks taken daily, they were the true foundation of the project, far more critical than any deadline or profit margin. The CEO realized his approach needed to shift, not just for the project's success, but for the respect and safety of everyone involved. Chapter 2, Foundations of Trust. The next morning, the atmosphere at the site was palpably different. Junaid arrived early, not with a clipboard or a list of orders, but with a willingness to listen and learn. He found Riaz already there, pacing the blueprints spread out on a makeshift table. The two men exchanged a nod, a silent truce acknowledging the fragile but genuine shift in their relationship. Junaid began engaging with the workers, asking questions about their processes, their challenges, and their safety concerns. He was surprised at the wealth of practical knowledge among the team, who had faced countless unforeseen issues with creativity and teamwork. He saw how Riaz wasn't just supervising from afar, he was the team's pillar, mediating disputes, addressing doubts, and encouraging precision. The respect Riaz commanded was not through fear or hierarchy but through earned trust. Riaz, for his part, was initially wary but gradually opened up. He shared his philosophy, that a strong structure isn't built on haste, but on patience and care. He explained how each beam, each weld, each calculation mattered because a single oversight could have catastrophic consequences. He confessed that the pressure to meet deadlines sometimes gnawed at him, but the safety of his crew and the integrity of the project came first. The day unfolded with several challenges: a minor equipment malfunction, a scheduling conflict, and an urgent material delivery. Instead of criticizing or blaming, Junaid witnessed firsthand how Riaz calmly managed each crisis, involving the team and solving problems collaboratively. Junaid's respect for the man grew, along with a dawning humility about his own leadership style. As evening approached, Junaid and Riaz stood side by side, overlooking the skeletal frame of the building that was slowly taking shape. The city lights flickered beyond the horizon, a symbol of progress and promise. Junaid broke the silence, expressing gratitude for Riaz's dedication and insight. He acknowledged his past mistakes, his impatience and failure to appreciate the complexity of the work on the ground. Riaz, too, softened, admitting that he had sometimes been inflexible and resistant to new ideas. They agreed to work together more closely, balancing speed with safety, innovation with tradition. This newfound partnership breathed new life into the project. Workers felt renewed confidence, the board relaxed, and regulators lifted some of their restrictions. But beyond the site, Junaid sensed something more profound had changed. His understanding of leadership evolved from commanding and controlling to listening and empowering. He saw that real progress required a foundation not just of steel and concrete, but of trust and respect between people. Chapter 3, Shifting Ground. Weeks passed, and the construction progressed steadily. The project's momentum shifted, fueled by a cohesive team led by two men who had bridged a seemingly unbridgeable divide. Junaid and Riaz had become partners in every sense, blending vision with pragmatism, ambition with caution. One late evening, as the sun dipped low, Junaid lingered on the site alone. He watched the crew wrap up their day, the welder he had noticed before, the crane operators, the engineers, all focused, proud, and connected. He recalled the first days when he had seen the site as merely a means to an end, a line item on a balance sheet. Now, it felt like a living organism, each person a vital part of the whole. The welder paused once again, wiping sweat and double-checking his work. Junaid felt a swell of emotion, admiration, respect, and a quiet sense of responsibility. He understood that the project was about more than buildings, it was about people, their dreams, their safety, and their livelihoods. The CEO's role was not just to drive profits but to nurture those human foundations. In the following weeks, the project continued without major setbacks. The media, initially fixated on the conflict, began to tell a new story, a story of collaboration, leadership growth, and a company learning from its mistakes. Junaid spoke openly in interviews about the importance of humility and listening. Riaz was recognized not just as a skilled manager but as a leader who had saved the project and, perhaps, changed the company's culture. The City Development Authority lifted its warnings, and the board's confidence returned. But the most lasting change was internal. Junaid implemented regular site visits for all executives, ensuring that decisions were grounded in reality. He encouraged open communication channels between management and workers, fostering mutual respect. The complex itself, when completed, stood not only as a testament to architectural prowess but as a symbol of human resilience and cooperation. It embodied the idea that shifting ground, whether literal or metaphorical, requires adaptation, empathy, and the courage to change. Junaid and Riaz, once adversaries, had become catalysts for transformation, proving that true leadership is about building bridges, not walls. And in the glow of that final weld, beneath the steel skeleton rising to the sky, the city found not just a new landmark, but a new story, one of trust, growth, and shifting ground. As the luxury SUV rolled away from the terminal, the world outside began to blur into the rhythm of city streets, airport roads, and distant aircrafts vanishing into the sky. Inside, the atmosphere was still, peaceful, warm, and full of unspoken understanding. Maya sat beside Armin, her fingers loosely interlaced with his, her eyes gazing out the window not in reflection of what had happened, but in quiet acceptance of what had always been. She wasn't angry, anger was loud and temporary. What she felt was something deeper, the stillness that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Armin, ever the composed titan of business and empire, was now simply a husband looking at the woman he admired more than any deal he'd ever closed. "You know," Maya finally said, her voice calm and clear, "for a moment, I really thought I should just turn around and walk away. Let them think whatever they want. Let them win." Armin looked at her with gentle seriousness, then replied, "And if you had, they never would have seen what quiet strength looks like." He paused. "They needed that moment more than you did." Maya gave a soft smile, the kind that came from experience, not pride. In her life with Armin, she had seen opulence up close. She had walked red carpets, sat at galas with heads of state, dined beneath chandeliers that cost more than entire homes. Yet through it all, she had remained true to her roots, to her softness, to the simple life she came from. She never needed designer labels to feel valuable. She never felt the need to prove herself to strangers. But today had reminded her that the world was still learning, still measuring people by the wrong standards, still confusing noise for importance. And maybe, just maybe, she had helped it unlearn something today. Back at the airport, people were still talking. The story of the woman in the plain dress who turned out to be the billionaire's wife would travel far. Some would share it with shame, others with surprise, but perhaps a few would carry its lesson forward. That appearances lie. That elegance doesn't always shine, it sometimes walks softly, speaks gently, and carries no badge but self-worth. As the SUV turned toward the private hangar, Maya rested her head on Armin's shoulder. The jet was waiting, its engines humming softly in the distance, ready to take them wherever they chose to go. But at that moment, there was no rush. No destination more important than the realization that she didn't need to speak up to be heard. She didn't need to wear gold to be seen. She didn't need anyone's permission to belong. The world had underestimated her, but she had answered it with silence, and in that silence was power. As their car eased to a stop beneath the soaring wings of the jet, Maya stepped out, not just as a wife, not just as a woman of wealth, but as a symbol. And the sky opened to receive her.